right. So you know all the big names in philosophy, right?
Hmm.
I mean, Aquinas, Augustine, Aristotle.
Yeah,
You've been there, done that.
probably read all their greatest hits.
Exactly. But have you ever heard of Dietrich of Freiberg?
Dietrich of Freiberg?
Yeah, not exactly a household name, is he?
No, not really.
But trust me on this one, this guy, a 13th century thinker, was wrestling with some really big questions, like about being and the intellect, stuff that still matters today.
Interesting.
Yeah, and for this deep dive, we're going to be looking at the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy's entry on him.
Oh, okay.
Now, I know encyclopedia entries can be a bit, well, dry, but this one is actually pretty readable, and it's got a ton of insights. So what we're going to do today is unpack Dietrich's main ideas, especially for, well, a philosopher like you listening. And we really want to highlight what makes his way of thinking so unique.
That's good.
So one of the first things that makes Dietrich stand out is his background. He was a Dominican friar, just like Aquinas, but he was really into Neoplatonism, especially the work of Proclus. So that's pretty interesting, right? Neoplatonism's the 13th century.
Yeah.
So just to give our listener a little background, can you give us a quick overview of what Neoplatonism brings to the table?
Sure. So Neoplatonism basically emphasizes the emanation of everything from what they called the one. That's like the ultimate source of being. Think of it like, I don't know, like a bright light that everything flows from.
Okay.
So for Dietrich, this means that the universe isn't just a bunch of random stuff, but it's structured like a hierarchy, kind of like a ladder of existence with, you guessed it, God at the very top.
I see, a hierarchy. Okay, so Dietrich is working within this framework of emanation and hierarchy. But where does he go from there?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. Dietrich takes this idea from Neoplatonism and pushes it in some really unexpected directions. He argues that all beings, and I mean all beings, even angels, have the same fundamental nature, that their essence is their existence.
Whoa, wait a minute. That sounds like he's going right up against Aquinas, who, if I remember correctly, said that only in God are essence and existence the same thing.
Exactly. You got it. Dietrich's view is kind of leveling the playing field in a way that Aquinas wouldn't have been okay with. It makes being more unified across the board. But then, of course, that raises a pretty important question.
Yeah, you're right. If everyone's essence is their existence, then how do we tell the difference between God and everything else?
Well, Dietrich's answer lies in the concept of hierarchy. Remember, everything comes from the one, from God. So everything that exists is trying to get back to that source. And he calls this reversion.
Okay, so it's not just about your place in the hierarchy, but also about this built-in movement back towards where it all began. But what does that actually look like? How can, let's say, a rock or a tree return to God? Is he talking about an actual physical return?
No, it's not about physical movement. It's more like a kind of pull, a drive that's built into the very nature of existence itself. Everything is oriented towards ultimately reuniting with that divine source.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get how this all fits together. Everything comes from God and is drawn back to God. But where does the human intellect fit into all of this? Dietrich seems to have some pretty radical ideas about that, doesn't he?
Absolutely, he does. And he really gets into this in his work called De Intellectu et Intelligibili, which translates to On the Intellect and the Intelligible. This is where he introduces this concept of ens conceptionale, or what we call conceptional being.
Conceptual being. Huh?
Mhm.
I think you got to break that down for us. What exactly is conceptual being, and why is it so important to Dietrich?
Well, Dietrich argues that, in a sense, the human intellect, I, is the universe, but in the realm of thought.
Okay.
Now, he's not saying that our minds literally contain all the physical stuff of the universe,
Right.
but he's saying that our intellect has the capacity to grasp and to represent the entirety of being.
So it's like our minds hold this blueprint of the universe, this conceptual map of everything that exists.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And this is where those Neoplatonic influences really come through.
I can definitely see how this conceptual being connects back to the ideas of emanation and reversion.
Exactly. For Dietrich, the human intellect is part of this big cosmic dance. And it's through our intellectual activity, our efforts to understand the universe, that we move towards that final reunion with the one.
So for Dietrich, knowledge isn't just about gathering facts. It's a pathway back to the source of all being. It's a pretty profound stuff, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
And he doesn't stop there. Dietrich even goes so far as to say that a part of our intellect, what he calls the agent intellect, is actually separate from our souls.
Right.
Wait, separate from our souls. How does that even work?
Well, he draws on Augustine's idea of there being an interiority within us that goes beyond our physical bodies.
Okay.
And Dietrich sees this agent intellect as a kind of divine spark within us, a link to this realm of conceptual being.
So we have this higher part of ourselves, the agent intellect, that's constantly connected to this vast conceptual universe. But if that's the case, why don't we experience this knowledge all the time? Why do we have to struggle and learn to understand things?
That's a great question. This is where Dietrich makes a distinction between our everyday, empirical consciousness and what he calls a transempirical consciousness that belongs to the agent intellect.
So it's like we have this huge ocean of knowledge inside of us, but we only get glimpses of it through our experiences and our efforts to understand things.
That's a good analogy. He's basically suggesting that learning and understanding are all about rediscovering what's already there inside of us, bringing this hidden knowledge into our conscious awareness.
And that ties back into the idea of reversion, right? Our striving to understand the universe, to use our intellects, is all part of that movement back towards unity with the One.
Precisely. But I think we should maybe pause here for a moment and let our listener really take all this in. Dietrich's ideas about the intellect are, well, they're quite a lot to digest.
Yeah, you're not kidding.
Dietrich's ideas about conceptual being and the agent intellect, they're definitely challenging, but they offer a really compelling way to look at how we connect to the universe and ultimately to something divine.
Yeah, I agree. And it makes you wonder how these ideas influenced other thinkers, other philosophical movements. I mean, did Dietrich just kind of drop this philosophical bomb and then disappear?
Oh, not at all. His ideas, especially his emphasis on the agent intellect and how it connects to a higher realm of being, they had a ripple effect throughout the history of philosophy. Like, think about Meister Eckhart.
Right.
He was a really key figure in German mysticism and was super influenced by Dietrich's work.
So we're talking about real impact here, not just some abstract theories floating around in academia.
Exactly. Dietrich's ideas really resonated with people who were looking for a more direct experience of the divine, a way to understand their own connection to the source of all being. And it wasn't just Eckhart. You can trace Dietrich's influence through guys like Nicholas of Cusa.
Nicholas of Cusa, wasn't he the one who came up with learned ignorance?
That's the one.
That's a fascinating connection.
Yeah, totally. Dietrich's focus on the agent intellect and its access to conceptual being kind of set the stage for Cusa's exploration of how understanding our own limitations can actually bring us closer to the divine.
Okay, so we're seeing these threads connecting Dietrich to mystical and philosophical movements that wrestle with these huge questions about knowledge and experience. But for a philosopher, like our listener, what would you say is the most important takeaway from Dietrich's system?
I think the big thing is that Dietrich offers a totally different way of thinking about how the mind relates to reality.
Okay.
He's not just saying we can understand the universe.
Right.
He's saying that in a way, we actually embody it through our capacity for conceptual being.
Wow. That's a pretty powerful idea. And it's not just about passively watching the world go by, is it?
No.
It's about actively participating in how it unfolds through, well, the power of the intellect.
You got it. Dietrich challenges us to rethink what knowledge really is. For him, it's not about collecting data or building systems.
Right.
It's about recognizing our connection to the source of all being and using our minds to, journey back towards that unity.
It's interesting. This whole idea of reversion keeps popping up. It seems pretty central to his whole system, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It is. It's like the driving force behind everything, both in the cosmos and inside each of us. Everything is striving for that ultimate reunion with the One. And our intellectual pursuits, they're a huge part of that journey.
It almost sounds like he's giving us a spiritual roadmap, a way to figure out our place in the grand scheme of things and use our minds as tools for, transcendence.
Yeah, I think so.
But for a philosopher who's really into logic and reason, all this might sound a bit mystical, How do you square Dietrich's emphasis on reversion and the agent intellect with a more, grounded philosophical approach?
That's a really good question, and it gets to the heart of what makes Dietrich so fascinating. He's not afraid to bridge the gap between philosophy and mysticism.
I see.
He actually sees them as intertwined. For Dietrich, true philosophical inquiry is a spiritual practice.
Yeah.
It's a way to purify the intellect and align ourselves with the divine order of the universe.
So it's not like an either-or situation, right? He's not saying we have to pick between reason and mystical experience.
Nope.
He's suggesting that they can actually work together, that
Yeah,
they can kind of illuminate each other.
exactly. And that's a pretty radical idea, especially for someone living in the 13th century. Dietrich is basically saying that pursuing wisdom involves our whole being, our intellect, our emotions, and our spiritual longings.
Okay, so there's this profound interconnectedness in Dietrich's system. But I'm still not totally clear on how this reversion actually plays out on a personal level. Like, what does it actually look like for a person to be part of this process?
Well, Dietrich really emphasizes the importance of contemplation, like turning our intellectual gaze inward and thinking about the nature of being, about our relationship to the one.
I agree.
It's about cultivating awareness, recognizing that divine spark within ourselves, and letting it guide our thoughts and actions.
So it's not just about reading books or having intellectual debates.
Right.
It's about developing a certain way of being in the world, a
Mm.
way of seeing everything as interconnected, and ultimately leading back to that source.
That's a great way to put it. And I think that's the most challenging and rewarding part of Dietrich's philosophy.
Mm.
He invites us to go beyond just understanding the universe intellectually and to engage with it on a deeper, more experiential level.
Yeah, that's a tall order.
Yeah.
But I can see why Dietrich's ideas have resonated with so many thinkers throughout history. He offers a vision of the universe that's both intellectually stimulating and spiritually enriching.
He does. And I think it's important to point out one more thing. Dietrich believed that everyone, every single person, has the capacity for this kind of spiritual and intellectual journey. It's not just for a select few. He saw their age and intellect as something universal, something that's present in all of us.
So we all have the potential to access this conceptual being and be part of this huge process of reversion. That's a pretty empowering idea.
It is. Dietrich reminds us that the quest for wisdom, the journey back to the one, it's open to everyone. It's just a matter of cultivating the right mindset and practicing the things that help us unlock our inner potential.
That's a powerful message. But before we wrap things up, I think there's one more piece of Dietrich's puzzle we should talk about. His work on optics and light metaphysics.
Oh, yeah.
How does that fit into his overall philosophical system?
That's a great point. Dietrich wasn't just a philosopher of the mind and being.
Right.
He was also a brilliant scientist who made some really important contributions to the field of optics.
Mm.
And his work on light, especially, is deeply connected to his metaphysical ideas.
Okay, this is where things get really interesting. For our listener who might not be familiar with Dietrich's scientific work, can you give us a rundown of what he was looking into?
Sure, so Dietrich was totally fascinated by light and how it interacts with the material world.
Okay.
He did experiments with lenses and prisms, studying how light bends and makes rainbows. He even came up with theories about how fast light travels, suggesting that it might be instantaneous.
Wait, a 13th century thinker exploring the speed of light? That's kind of mind-blowing.
It is, isn't it? And what's really cool is how he connects these scientific findings to his metaphysical ideas. For Dietrich, light becomes this metaphor for divine illumination, for how being emanates from the one.
I see.
He sees the way light radiates and lights up the world as similar to how the divine essence flows out and gives life to everything.
So his scientific work isn't just separate from his philosophical system, it's woven right into it.
Exactly. He's using what he observes in the natural world to shed light on his understanding of the spiritual realm.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored Dietrich's ideas about being, intellect, and the process of reversion. We've touched on his influence on later thinkers, and even gotten into his work on optics and light metaphysics. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's important to ask one final question. What does Dietrich's philosophy have to offer us today in the 21st century? What can a 13th century thinker teach us about the challenges and possibilities of our own time?
That's a big question, but a really good one. I think Dietrich's greatest gift to us is his invitation to think differently, to challenge the usual assumptions about reality, knowledge, and our place in the cosmos.
Hmm.
He reminds us that there are ways to see the world that go beyond just the material stuff, ways that reconnect us to something bigger than ourselves.
And he's also a reminder that the quest for knowledge is a journey, not a destination.
Right.
It's about always expanding our understanding, pushing our own boundaries, and striving for that ultimate reunion with the source of all being.
Exactly, and I think that message is especially important in a world that often feels fragmented and disconnected.
Yeah.
Dietrich gives us a vision of unity, of interconnectedness, that can inspire us to look for a more whole and meaningful way to be in the world.
Well, I think we've given our listener a lot to think about today. Dietrich of Freiberg might not be a household name, but as we've seen, His ideas are just as relevant and thought-provoking as ever.
Totally agree. He's a true philosophical gem, just waiting to be discovered. And honestly, I think we've only scratched the surface of his rich and complex thinking.
I'm with you on that. But for now, we'll have to leave our listener with this invitation to delve into Dietrich's work and discover for themselves the power and beauty of his unique vision. Okay, so we've talked about how fascinating Dietrich's ideas are about light and optics and how they all tie into his metaphysics. But I'm curious, how did the other thinkers of his time react to all of this? I mean, did they just accept his theories, or was there a pushback?
Well, you have to remember that Dietrich was living in a really exciting time intellectually. They had just rediscovered all these works by Aristotle,
Mm.
and that was shaking things up in the world of philosophy. There were tons of debates about how to fit ancient Greek thought together with Christian theology.
A lot of intellectual turmoil and competing ideas going around. So where did Dietrich fit into all of this?
Oh, he was right in the middle of it all. He was engaging with Aristotle, but also with Neoplatonists like Proclus.
Mm.
And he was trying to carve out his own path, like trying to blend these different schools of thought into something new and original.
And how did his fellow philosophers react to that?
It was kind of a mixed bag, really. Some of them were really intrigued by his ideas, especially his theories about light and vision. But others were more skeptical, particularly about his views on the agent intellect and its connection to conceptual being.
Yeah, I can imagine those ideas might have ruffled a few feathers, especially among those who were really committed to Aristotle's framework.
Absolutely. The idea that part of our intellect is actually separate from the soul and can access this universal realm of conceptual being, well, that was a pretty radical idea back then.
It's still a pretty radical idea today, but that's what makes Dietrich so interesting, isn't it? He wasn't afraid to push the limits of conventional thought.
For sure. And even if some of his contemporaries completely rejected his ideas, his work sparked all these important debates and discussions that continued long after he was gone.
So his influence really stretched beyond his own lifetime. What kind of legacy did he leave behind?
Well, like we mentioned earlier, he had a direct impact on thinkers like Meister Eckhart and Nicholas of Cusa. But it goes even deeper than that. His work helped to keep the Neoplatonic tradition alive in the West, at a time when Aristotelianism was the dominant force. And that paved the way for later thinkers like Marsilio Ficino and the Renaissance Platonists who rediscovered and reinterpreted Plato's works.
So he played a big role in shaping the direction of Western philosophy. Not bad for a thinker who's not exactly a household name.
Right.
Right.
No, not bad at all. And I think what he did still offers us some really valuable insights today. He reminds us that philosophy isn't just about logic and arguments. It's about exploring those big questions, the mysteries of existence, and using our minds to connect with something bigger than ourselves.
And he shows us that it's okay to question conventional wisdom, to think outside the box, and to forge our own paths.
Exactly. Dietrich encourages us to be intellectually adventurous, to explore different perspectives, and to bring together seemingly different ideas into something new and meaningful.
Well, I think we've given our listener a pretty thorough deep dive into the world of Dietrich of Freiberg. We've explored his key ideas, his historical context, and his lasting influence on philosophy. But before we wrap up, I want to leave our listener with one final thought. If Dietrich were alive today, what do you think he would have to say about the state of modern philosophy? What challenges and opportunities would he see for those of us who are wrestling with those big questions in the 21st century?
That's a really great question. Honestly, I think Dietrich would be both excited and challenged by the state of modern philosophy. On one hand, he'd be thrilled by all the advancements we've made in science and technology and all the new ways of understanding the universe that they've opened up. But on the other hand, I think he might also be concerned about the trend towards specialization and fragmentation in academic philosophy.
Yeah, I can see that. Dietrich was a master of synthesis, of weaving together different threads of thought into a cohesive whole. He might encourage us to look beyond the narrow boundaries of our own disciplines and seek a more holistic understanding of the world.
Yeah, I think you're right. And he might also urge us to reconnect philosophy with its spiritual roots, to see the pursuit of wisdom as a path towards personal transformation and a deeper connection with the source of all being.
That's a powerful message, and one that really resonates in our current cultural climate. We're living in a time of so much uncertainty and upheaval, and a lot of people are searching for meaning and purpose. Dietrich's philosophy gives us a way to navigate those challenges, to find a firm footing in a vision of the universe that is both intellectually rigorous and spiritually enriching.
Well said. So, to our listener, we encourage you to keep exploring Dietrich's thought provoking ideas, dive into his works, talk about them with others, and see how his philosophy might speak to your own search for understanding and meaning.
And remember, the journey of philosophical inquiry never really ends. It's a lifelong process of discovery, questioning, and growth. So keep exploring, keep wondering, and keep diving deep into the mysteries of existence.